Good morning. Welcome to the July 5th, 2020 service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Sheridan, Wyoming. I hope you're all having a good July 4th and your pets haven't run away from the All right, well, if announcements come in later, we'll announce them. And next is a reading from Bruce. Hang on a moment. All right.
Got it.
And Bruce will be singing a solo. We have a nice treat. And Nancy Phillips will be playing piano after the reading. So we have a nice treat for you this morning.
This reading is a quote of Paul Robeson. I shall take my words wherever there are those who want to hear the melody of freedom, or the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of despair and fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only by peace that peace can be attained. The song of freedom must prevail. When when you walk through a storm or head high. And don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bruce. That was beautiful, and thank you, Nancy, for that nice accompaniment. All right, now we're going to light a chalice. Do-si-do. Do-si-do. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, to serve human needs, and to help one another. I'll go ahead and light one this morning for the joy of our freedoms in the U.S. Do you have one?
I want to light one for the safe arrival and traveling of our son Doug and our wonderful daughter-in-law Gabriela to get here so we can see them after so long a time.
Ian just says he's happy to be here virtually, but that's not. Oh, Jolyn says safe. Jolyn echoes you. I don't have any coming in via text.
Well, we will light later as joys and concerns might come in. I invite Bruce up.
Oh, Chris
Oh.
Corfonta would like you to light a candle for her mom.
Okay, one from Chris Corfonta. We'll light a candle for her mom.
Okay, Victor Asher. Victor asks us to light a candle for his son Jeff, who just completed an intensive 9-month training as a programmer and is starting an internship. Congratulations, Jeff.
Congrats. All right, if we get any more coming through, we'll announce them later. That's right. Let's light one more for the joys and concerns.
Ian lights a joy for Jules helping run the live stream. Anything for you, Ian?
Yes, we should thank Jules today for giving Ian and Grace a break.
I was going to say, Ian and Grace being tireless and helping our church so much. They're wonderful. Ramona would also like you to light a candle for her friend Dankita and her battle with cancer.
All right. I don't know if you can hear this, but
I'm really close, so I think.
Ramona for Dankita. And I'll do one last one for the joys and concerns that remain in our hearts.
It should just be on there.
This is a reading for our meditation silently. It's by Frederick Douglass. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning, and they want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or maybe both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress.
I have the privilege of introducing Bruce Andrews. The talk he's offering is called Freedom in One Life. He did it several years ago, and it is one of the most heartfelt and amazing stories of freedom that I've ever heard. And thus I asked him to reprise it. And Bruce has been a longtime member of the fellowship. And as you just witnessed, he has a wonderful singing voice. So it's always a treat to hear Bruce sing. With no further ado, Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. The last time I did this talk was July 3rd, 2016, before COVID, the Black Lives Matter work. You'll see the places. First, as one might expect, the subject of freedom lends itself to many volumes of material. In an attempt to deal with that reality, I have elected to choose certain ties of Unitarian Universalism to freedom. Second, I will address some definitions, concepts, and applications of the idea of freedom, along with the inevitable use of quotes from others. Finally, I will share with you some of my personal experiences and ideas regarding freedom. To the extent that I may repeat myself from earlier presentations to this group, I do not remember everything I said before, and I hope that any repetitions are seen as relevant to the subject of freedom. So what is this thing called freedom? I used my iPhone and added some of my own ideas to generate a lengthy list of and share only a part. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrances or restraint. Absence of subjugation to foreign domination or despotic government. The power of self-determination, attributed to the will, the quality of being independent of fate or necessity. Freedom of conscience, freedom of choice. Life is made up of the choices you make and the actions you take. Freedom related to patriotism. My country, right or wrong, my country. When it is right, to keep it right. When it is wrong, to make it right. That's my paraphrase. Another quote related to this idea is from Dag Hammarskjöld. Never, for the sake of peace and quiet, deny your own experience or convictions. Individual freedom. Freedom to protect one's family. Freedom to protect people who are vulnerable. I fully realize that I've left out common freedoms like freedom of the press and others. If I didn't leave something out, we would be here for a very long time. I hope my selection of a cross-section of my life and freedoms upon which I focus are relevant for you and help you to think in regard to it. Think of it as a selected bibliography, which lets you know that there are many other references available. Next, I want to quote from a blog of a man named Bill Murphy Jr. He quotes others, and even though I had to do so, I found it very difficult to select out any of the quotes. Murphy starts by saying, Independence Day is one of the best American holidays, both for what we celebrate and how we celebrate it. It is easy, however, to take liberty for granted and to misconstrue just how difficult it was to gain our freedoms 200 plus years ago. The Revolutionary War was a long and costly, arguably the second longest conflict in American history. I would call it a war, not a conflict. While the 50,000 or so casualties on the American side are roughly equal in number to the total dead and wounded in Afghanistan and the dead military personnel in Vietnam, I might add. This was at a time when there were fewer than 3 million people living in the former British colonies. Now, this is before COVID-19. And he says, so by all means, march in a parade, host a barbecue, have a few beers, head to the beach, light off some fireworks. My family and I will be right there with you, but take a minute or two to reflect on why we celebrate as well. And here are some of the best things ever said about freedom, some poignant, some rebellious, some even funny, just to get you thinking. The truth will set you free, but first of all, it'll piss you off. Gloria Steinem. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. Albert Camus. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. George Washington. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Nelson Mandela. I do not agree with what you have to say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. Voltaire. They who can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Benjamin Franklin. The advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only guardian of true liberty. James Madison. Nothing is more difficult and therefore more precious than to be able to decide. Napoleon Bonaparte. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Martin Luther King, Jr. I'd like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free and wanted other people to also be free. Rosa Parks. It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. Samuel Adams. Freedom lies in being bold. Robert Frost. That last quote by Robert Frost leads me to want to share my life as I've experienced it thus far. At first, I was going to paraphrase the last quote by Frost in this way: freedom lies in being assertive. I felt bold sounded too self-aggrandizing, and being assertive is necessary. Then I decided that bold indeed fit based on choices and actions I took during my formative years. In about 1964, when I was falling into and out of love on an almost weekly basis and reading everything I could about that elusive state, I came across another quote by a man named Paul Tournier, and this is it. Love is a risk-taking. It involves daring to be vulnerable and hurt. The search for security is the enemy of loving. I have paraphrased that saying many times as follows: life is a risk-taking. It involves daring to be vulnerable and hurt. The search for security is the enemy of living. During the next few years, to this day in my life, freedom of conscience and freedom of choice have been guiding forces in my life, even though at times I have felt very vulnerable because they have required the taking of risks. One important thing I have learned is that risk-taking involves not just the risk of failure, but also the risk of succeeding. Here's a bit of my history and my parents' generation and the one before that have contributed to my learning. My maternal great-grandfather, Lorenzo Johnson, a mulatto, served in the United States 31st and 45th Colored Troops as an infantryman. During World War War II, my Uncle Jack survived service in the U.S. Navy. My Uncle Bob was a B-17 bomber pilot who survived the attack of Pearl Harbor, only to be killed later off New Zealand. My father was called up, but not required to serve active duty due to the, quote, sole surviving son, unquote, law, and the fact that he was participating in research on the development of penicillin. In my generation, I had two cousins, one in the Navy and one in the Air Force, and I attended 2 required years of Army ROTC at the University of Wyoming, initially terminating that experience in the spring of 1965. Tremendous troop increases in Vietnam beginning that year and a poor grade average led me to return to ROTC in the spring of 1966. I read everything I could get my hands on regarding Vietnam and the U.S. involvement there. As a result, I became involved in serious draft counseling, working out of an office in the United Presbyterian Church in Laramie, Wyoming. I counseled young men legal and illegal means of dealing with the draft, as well as the legal consequences of both. In addition, I joined an organization called Individuals Against the Crime of Silence. These people registered their opposition to the Vietnam War by having their names placed on record at the United Nations, stating their opposition. They wanted their opposition clearly stated in case there might ever be war trials after the Vietnam War, like those held at Nuremberg after World War II. While in ROTC, I was initially assigned to the Armor branch of the Army. I requested a branch transfer from Armor to Medical Service Corps, stating that my professional life in the field of psychology was to be devoted to the maintenance and rehabilitation of human lives rather than their destruction. I was granted the transfer with the support of my ROTC commander, a full bird colonel. Next, during officer basic training at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, I was advised that there might be combat circumstances under which I may be combat troops. I decided then that only I would make the decision whether or not I would kill another human being. I resolved to use all legal means available to be able to live by that decision. This led to 2 applications for status as a 1AO conscientious objector, that is, an in-service non-combatant. The first was rejected because it was seen by the Army, quote, as a merely personal moral code, unquote. I persisted with the help of an ACLU lawyer in Seattle and was granted that status on October 13, 1968. The importance of family and friends in this process cannot be overstated. Having that status secured, I decided that since I was against war in general and the Vietnam War specifically, I'd be far more knowledgeable if I experienced war. I was willing to entertain the possibility that my position was wrong. In addition, I was 24 and a half years old at the time and had never really been tried by life. I didn't need to know how tough I was, yet in some way I needed to know what I could handle. Norman MacLean, in his book, Young Men and Fire, speaks to this need as seen in young smoke jumpers. He writes, "It is very important to a lot of people to make unmistakably clear to themselves and to the universe that they love the universe, but are not intimidated by it and will not be shaken by it, no matter what it has in store. Moreover, they demand something from themselves early in life that can be taken ever after as a demonstration of this abiding feeling." For many smoke jumpers, then, smoke jumping is not tied up closely with their way of life, but it is more something necessary for them to pass through and not around and once it is unmistakably done, does not have to be done again. The it is within, and it is the need to settle some things with the universe and ourselves before taking on the business of the world, which isn't all that special or hard, but it takes time. This it is something special within that demands we do something special, and it could be within a lot of us. Thus, on November 26, 1968, I volunteered for service in Vietnam. The Army obliged me with orders for just that. I was assigned to Headquarters and Headquarters Company, 2nd the 505 Infantry, 3rd Brigade, 82nd Airborne Division. I was Field Medical Operations Officer / Medical Platoon Leader. Some of my duties included assigning medics to line companies, identification of killed and wounded, defense counsel in courts-martial cases, processing of civilian and Chu Hoi personnel, paymaster, and counseling troops, along with my assigned duties of medical operations and supply. While I was in Vietnam, there were only 3 instances where I was harassed because of my conscientious objector status. First, a major assigned me to identify bodies at the morgue. When I returned, he said, "Do you want to kill a bunch of gooks?" I answered, "No, sir, that's not the point." He said, "Well, at least you're not a chicken shit, you're here." I saluted the rank on his shoulder and had no respect whatsoever for him. Second, an infantry lieutenant essentially called because he found out I was a conscientious objector. I still am, by the way. When I convinced him that I would protect myself, he dropped the issue. Finally, President Eisenhower died while I was there. We had a military formation as the flag was retrieved to half-mast. A lieutenant colonel told me I needed to check out a sidearm from the quartermaster because that was part of the uniform. I told him I was a conscientious objector and did not carry a weapon. He insisted I check out the weapon. I did, but I did not holster it. Our battalion commander, a full-bird colonel, came along and asked what the problem was. The lieutenant colonel told him that I was disobeying an order. I told the colonel I was a conscientious objector and would not carry a weapon. I also carried a copy of my conscientious objector confirmation from the Conscientious Objector Review Board in my pocket. The battalion commander told the lieutenant colonel to take my weapon and check it into the quartermaster. I went to the formation with an empty holster and the flap turned up and tucked in to show it was empty. Other than these instances, no one ever said anything about my conscientious objector status. I just did my job. I served in Vietnam from January 1969 to December 1969. I often say I don't know exactly how long my service was, but I think it was approximately 10 months, 5 days, 3 hours, and 46 seconds from touchdown to liftoff at Benoit Air Base. I returned to home December 8, 1969. "17 years after my return, during December of 1986, PTSD symptoms began to surface, significantly enough for me to recognize them and ask for help. Fortunately, I had the support of a loving family, Hollis Hackman of the VA, the Casper Vet Center, and the generous permission of Chief Redman, a Arapaho Native American medicine man, to participate in the Native American sweat called the Day of the Howling Dog. As a result, true healing was begun and continues to this day. There remains a pilgrimage back to Vietnam to continue the healing process by, perhaps, returning with an additional, more positive set of memories. A guiding influence for me came at the end of the movie Platoon. Taylor, the protagonist, is reflecting on his war experience as he is lifted off the battlefield in a dust-off chopper to go home. He says, I think now, looking back, we did not fight the enemy. We fought ourselves, and the enemy was within us. The war is over for me now, but will be there for the rest of my days. But, be that as it may those of us who did make it have an obligation to build again, to teach others what we know, and to try with what's left of our lives to find a goodness and a meaning to this life. I have taken that paragraph very seriously in my life. As I conclude, I need you to know that I learned that I am more of a patriot than I thought I was before my Vietnam experiences. I believe in the principles upon which our flag represents, and that we as responsible citizens must speak and act to uphold those principles and to bring them forward in an appropriate form to each new day and for each new generation. In addition, I believe more strongly that war is not the answer. At the same time, I believe each individual needs to search inside themselves to determine where they will draw the line, and yes, possibly act violently to protect themselves, their loved ones, and vulnerable others in this world. I have learned that I have no right to judge anyone about how they deal with this issue. Neither does anyone have a right to judge me. Each individual must struggle with this issue themselves. That is where freedom of conscience and freedom of choice hold sway. Those freedoms, in my experience, are available in our country. I, for one, have benefited my whole life because of them. And I'm sorry to say that my brothers and sisters of color have not. Fortunately, I have my wife and my children to remind me of what's important. From my wife, Jo, this is now November 24th, 1969, in a letter she wrote me while I was in Nam. Quote from the Spoon River Anthology. And suppose I see what you never saw and never heard of and have no word for. I must talk nonsense when you ask me, what is it I see? On November 11th, 2009, almost 40 years to the day, she quoted Walt Whitman. The moon gives you light, and the bugles and drums give you music. And my heart, oh my soldiers, my veterans, my heart gives you love. Amy, in 1989, at 13 years old, we must not bury the darkness of yesterday if we are to uncover a brighter tomorrow. She wrote that after visiting the wall. Doug, in 1989, at 10 years old, all I can say is peace, Pop. Dona nobis pacem. Give us peace and let freedom ring. May it be so. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And next we'll have hymn number 147.
As tranquil streams that meet and merge and flow as church that shall be free. Free from the bonds that bind the mind to narrow thought and lifeless creed. Free from a social code that fails to serve the cause of human need. A freedom that reveres the past, but trusts the dawning future more, and bids the soul in search of truth adventure boldly and explore. Prophetic church, the future waits your liberating ministry. Go forward in the power of love, proclaim the truth that makes us free.
Now it is time for us to sustain our fellowship. Please send your donations to Ramona Stein at 15905, number B206, Sheridan 82801. You can also donate online to tithely.com. There's a link at our website and also from the YouTube. All right, let's bless our offering. Let this be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is so sacred to many of us, a community of memory and hope, for we are the keepers of the dream.
And these are my closing words. Cherish Your Doubts. It's by Robert T. Weston. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the attendant of truth. Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery. A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief. Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which eats away the false. Let no one fear for the truth, that doubt may consume it. For doubt is a testing of belief. The truth stands boldly and unafraid. It is not shaken by the testing. For truth, if it be true, arises from each testing stronger, more secure. Those that would silence doubt are filled with fear. Their houses are built on shifting sands. But those who fear not doubt and know its use are founded on rock. They shall walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure. Therefore, let us not fear doubt, but let us rejoice in its help. It is the wise as a staff to the blind. Doubt is the attendant of truth. Robert T. Weston wrote that.
Discussion.
Oh,
Weston or Weston? Weston. Okay, so we have a question from Victor asking about the moral basis of your decision to be a conscientious objector. He also thanks you for your talk.
Moral basis. The moral basis for it, for me, I think, came from growing up in my home. Of course, my dad hated the war because his little brother was killed in it, so World War II. But my mom and dad always modeled caring for other people. Mom was a nurse, dad was a college professor. He taught in the Ag College at UW. And they expected a lot of themselves as well as those around them. The moral basis is when they told me, do whatever it is you have to do to live by what your principles are. Therefore, you need to know what your principles are. At the time I was in the service, that was a real testing of whatever principles I had at the time. And when I was told that I might have to lead combat troops, that wasn't what I went into Medical Service Corps for. It was for the rehabilitation and the maintenance of life rather than its destruction. And so the only way I could be assured that I wouldn't be ordered to do that by someone else was to have that decision. And so application for conscientious objector status was the only route I had legally to do that. And so I took that step, and I found how many friends I had. And so that's kind of my moral basis for what I did. And I have yet to regret it, and I don't think I.
Chris asked for the source of the reading from the beginning, and Susan responded that it's from Paul Robeson.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Catherine Osborne says, thank you for sharing your story with us. It was a real gift. And Ian Grace says, very moving personal stories. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions or comments for Mr. Andrews?
I'd like to add something myself because I put it in bits and pieces, not in my written text, but what I needed to say at the time. I know that in these times, I am learning a lot about my white privilege. I have a lot more to learn. And I think it contributed in some ways to my being able to do what I did, whereas others might not, particularly others of color.
Yeah.
And I don't take that lightly. And I just want to know that it's recognized, and I will hopefully grow and learn from that new greater recollection. And I have to tell you that part of that is from my mom and dad too. Because our home, it was a block off the campus at UW, and mom and dad welcomed everybody. Dad had Somalia and Ireland and Africa and just all sorts of different places along the world, in the world. And we would always have them around our table and having discussions with my dad, which is amazing in itself. But people were welcome in our home. Mom and dad both worked full time. We had ladies that helped clean our home, and they became our family. They weren't the help. They were true, welcome, loved friends. Mm-hmm. And they loved my mom and dad. And years later, after my mom died, some of them stopped through to visit dad just because of what they experienced in our home. So there's some more of the moral base as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you for sharing that. Chris has one question for you really quick.
Oh, okay.
She wants to bring back the draft.
No, I don't. I don't think we should bring back the military draft. I think it should be voluntary. I haven't thought about that much, but I believe it would be helpful to consider the possibility, and there's a lot of discussion, and that has to be happen, of national service.
I've been saying this for years.
I think that the Peace Corps, all of these kinds of things that help us to know other people in other countries better, to learn their languages and their culture, to help them teach us what life is really like throughout the world, rather than growing up just within the borders of the United States or one state within the United States.
Yeah.
So I really believe a national service corps of different sorts would be helpful for those who are, physically and mentally able to provide that service.
I have two more things. Phil, through Janelle's phone, says, thank you so much for having, quote, merely personal morals and the fortitude to defend them.
Thanks, Phil.
Also, Ian sent something. He said, living in freedom is a big responsibility. Your talk really illustrated that. What do you think folks in Sheridan can do now to meet the challenges we face as free individuals?
Well, I realized that the theme this month had to do with freedom and responsibility. I hope my talk did reflect taking responsibility. In Sheridan, I believe in this whole nation. There are things that we can do that have been trumpeted, broadcast, repeated. And I'll say it again. Wear a mask, wash your hands, keep social distancing, care about other people, not just yourself. The mask helps you, but it helps others even more. I think they can do those things regarding COVID. In regard to race relations and cultural differences, I really believe that there are times when people need to stand up and speak up in support of others who are not of color. Let me tell you real quickly a story about that, because I believe that lives in all of us, no matter one's color. One time I was in Nam, I was at our battalion trains, we called it, and there was a little place that they had a little bar and some beer for the enlisted men, because it was a stand-down place. It wasn't up in the boonies. But a troop from another unit came across the fence and into our place. And I was a duty officer, so I was the only officer there. I was in flip-flop because I twisted my ankle. Okay, what happened was that there was this one fellow from the other unit who came with a buddy, and he started trash talk and racial talk to our Puerto Rican bartender who came out over the bar after him. This guy was a hunk of beef. He really was. And he could have wiped the floor up with me, frankly. But what happened was that he was being drunk and stupid. And he started to come towards me. He was advancing on me. And I said, that's an order. I'm Lieutenant Andrews. And he kept coming. And when he got within about 2 feet of me, I remember this. I wish I had a picture of it, but there was this long, sinewy black arm that came over my shoulder and boom, stopped him in his tracks. He took care of me. He had my 6. Mm-hmm. And I said, there's about 100 guys out here. I'd be glad to wipe you up. You either get out of here. His friends started leaving right away. And this guy finally got the picture through his drunkenness. Yeah. But that was somebody standing up for me. And officers didn't always have the greatest reputation. Yeah. But somehow he did that for me. And why wouldn't I do that for someone else? Why would I not? I can't even imagine why not. There you go.
Yeah. A couple more things. Sorry.
Okay.
You're still in the hot box. hot seat, whatever. I don't know what it's called. Chris said she loved your answer, and Cal sent a text. He said, despite his iPhone sketchy performance today, being able to hear about one of the 3 phrases during your presentation was more than enough to remind me how important the choice and responsibility of conscientious objection is to our freedom, and how much I appreciate your perspective on that. You should know that in 50 years, you are the only person who has specifically recognized my Colorado journey as a patriotic service to our country. Thank you for that.
You betcha, buddy.
Okay, and then I think that with that, you're out of the hot seat.
Thank you, Bruce. Again, that's a wonderful talk. And Jules will help me extinguish. Okay. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we hold in our hearts until we are together again. Zoom meeting working? Please join us for the Zoom meeting linked in the email Victor sent for a little coffee and treats after the service. Thank you.